Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on fatigue awareness and management for farmers. My name is Taya Green, and I work as CAP's program manager. CAP has been hosting webinars throughout the pandemic to provide information and support for farmers and others, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us today. I'd like to introduce Laurie Forbes from Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development, who has organized the webinar logistics. Thank you very much, Laurie. Before I introduce today's presenter, I want to go over some housekeeping for today's webinar. Our webinar will include a presentation followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and I will pose them to our presenter at the end of her presentation. I will not share who wrote the question, so feel free to ask your questions with confidence of confidentiality. I also want to mention that we're going to have a couple interactive polls in our presentation, so please be ready to provide answers. And again, these are done confidentially. We will not know who's responded with what answer. With that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Laurie Brookhouse, who is the Farm Safety Advisor for Farm Safety Nova Scotia. Laurie has extensive experience developing tools to help farmers become more aware of their fatigue levels and learn how to effectively manage fatigue at the farm level. We thought this webinar was extremely timely, both for the time of year. Spring seeding has a lot of demands, and spring calving for some of us, but also we recognize that during the pandemic, many farms may be experiencing labor shortages due to various situations, so there may be even more fatigue present at this point in time. This webinar is being offered twice this week. On Tuesday, we had one at noon in Manitoba, and today we're having one to align with noon in Nova Scotia. And we welcome farmers from Nova Scotia, Manitoba, and across Canada today. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our presenter today, Laurie Brookhouse.
Thank you, Taya. Good morning and good afternoon to whichever part of Canada you're in today, participating in this webinar. So today, I basically want to go through some fatigue management practices that may help you on farm. So as part of our learning outcomes, we're going to recognize some causes of fatigue, explore the effects of fatigue on your physical and mental health, and learn methods to cope with fatigue and become a resilient farmer. With that, we're going to have some performance outcomes as well. This is where you're going to have your pen and paper ready, or a notes section on your tablet or computer open, just to record some numbers when we get to the fatigue calculator. So we're going to first, though, determine your perception of how tired you are. Then we're going to calculate it, and then we're going to test your knowledge on fatigue effects and how you may be feeling. What do you know already? So the whole part of fatigue at risk management came from Mind the Gap Farm. For many years, I was wondering why people would do things, even though they've had the training and knew what to do. And so there had to be something that was underlying. So with a great deal of research, I came up with Mind the Gap Farm. GAP means good analytical practice. As you guys know, on farm, you want to make sure you evaluate all your tasks before you perform them so you can prevent incident injury. And what we've discovered, some of those underlying causes of incident injury have basically three components. The first farm being fatigue at risk management, so mitigating the hazard of fatigue. The second farm is first always right-minded. So having a positive work culture on the farm. So even how you communicate, how you get work done, using a positive language changes how things or how people work on the farm. So for instance, instead of hurry up and get it done, and you say, take your time, do it right, follow the best practice. So using that different culture puts less pressure on the worker and has a tendency to prevent incident injury. The last farm is focused approach, right method. So having something written down and training workers to a farm safety plan or best practices helps them follow a guideline on how to do certain tasks on the farm. So with that, you have Mind the Gap, so good analytical practices with three basic components of how to do that. So today we're going to focus on fatigue at risk management. So it is a hazard like, of anything else on the farm: chemicals, the farm machinery, silos, grain bins, manure pits, the animals you're working with and that are being housed on the farm. Today, COVID-19 is part of that, right? Biological hazard. So fatigue, though, has many effects, and it can result in slower reaction time. It can change how we proceed with different tasks that we do. So we may have good judgment one day, but if we're fatigued the next, we may not make that same decision to have poor judgment based on the conditions that exist and our fatigue levels. We could be easily distracted when we're fatigued, not able to concentrate on the task. We may not perform the task as we think we are doing it as usual, but maybe the quality of work just isn't the same. So here are some of the causes that we've looked at. So it may not always be getting the recommended 7 to 9 hours per night, but it could be an underlying medical condition. Maybe there's something else going on. You need to go to the doctor and get checked out. But most commonly, it could be your work demands. So looking at labor shortages, even right now, across the provinces, there's been delays in getting our temporary foreign worker groups in to be able to help with our seasonal practice, especially in the spring, and then there could be that delay for harvest. So this is creating a lot of stress on the farmer, plus the local labor. So with CERB being offered, maybe you're not getting your local labor back on farm, or they're worried about becoming infected. They don't know what kind of things can happen in relation to COVID-19 on the farm. So they could be nervous about coming back to work. Quite often on the farm, we have to get used to doing more with less, and that can create a little stress, which affects our fatigue level. Weather, just here in Nova Scotia, in 2019, we had severe frost late into the season, which changed the harvest, as well as, 2018 for frost. And last year was Hurricane Dorian in 2019 in September. So quite dramatic changes there, and the expectations of income had changed drastically, and even the damage to the crops was phenomenal. So focus down further, that can kind of lead to financial pressures and difficulties on that side of things. And to include with those financial pressures, we now have, with COVID-19, imposed restrictions. So our 6 feet of distancing, hand washing, more hand washing stations, hand sanitizer, gloves, face shields, more people that to work on the farm to be able to monitor to ensure those new demands are met and the restrictions are being followed. So here's the philosophical question: why do we do things even though we know better? So we have two parts of the brain. So with a little research, DECRA kind of separated this out to show us that our brains work differently. So in the fast brain, which I've called the hare, this is the part of the brain that is very automatic, it's very reactive, it's habitual. So it has the ability to just keep us doing things over and over again. And this reaction time is only 0.4 of a second. So the whole goal of this is to give feedback very quickly, but it can cause frequent errors because it may miss some important changes. On the tortoise side, or the slow brain, this is our gap. This is our good analytical practice. So this is where we want to make sure we're analytical, we're thinking in a reasonable manner, we're being reflective and thoughtful of our actions. The unfortunate part of the tortoise, as we know, is slower. So this part of the brain, it takes at least 1 second to activate it, but it takes longer if the person is suffering from fatigue. So you compare 0.4 of a second to 1 second, you can see how things are transitioning here. So there could be, using the fast brain, more injuries and incidents than if we were able to engage the slow brain. So here, I want to just kind of focus on the interference. 39 to 67% of the world's workforce is sleep deprived. Now, in this higher end, this is where your doctors and lawyers usually fall, but not too far behind that is our farmers, our agricultural industry, because of the very long hours of work we have a tendency to do, especially if we have busy seasons. So what I want to do is a little activity with you. So I have a poll that what we're going to do first is measure how you think you're feeling. How tired do you feel right now? So Lori Forbes is going to launch the poll for me. And what you're going to do is choose in one of these 5 categories on how tired you are. So the more people that participate, the better and more accurate my information will be coming back to you. So 0 is not tired, 1 to 4, low levels of tiredness, 5 to 8, difficulty concentrating, 9 to 10, high levels of exhaustion, and 11 is falling asleep right now. So this could be causing you not to be able to complete the poll. Lori, I'll send it over to you.
All right, so the poll has been launched, and I see some people submitting their answer right now. Like there's no wrong answer, so hopefully you can choose one. We're at about 56% have voted currently, so we'll give it a couple more seconds here for people to submit their choice.
It's only a perception, so feel free to put your number in there. Nobody sees your answer.
All right, so I will close the poll and launch the results. All right, so the results, 0% for not tired, 40% for low levels of tiredness, 40% for difficulty concentrating, 20% for high levels of exhaustion, and 0% for falling asleep right now.
Yes, everybody, we still have you. Very good. So let's move forward and see what the actual number is. So what I want to do is bring up this fatigue calculator, and what we're going to do is measure the actual level of fatigue right at this moment. So with your pen and paper, what I want you to do is write on your paper X, Y, Z, or in your notes if you're doing this electronically. And then under X, or next to X, whichever you prefer, I want you to write in the number of hours you slept in the last 24 hours. So if you consider a full day, if you went to bed last night, how many hours did you sleep before you got up this morning? Just give you a moment to put that number in there. Now, Y, you're going to calculate the number of hours you slept in the last 2 nights. So the number of hours you slept in the last 48. You can include nap times in this calculation as well. So yesterday at lunch, if you had a 30-minute cat nap, then that could be added into your 24s and 48 hours as well. And then Z is the number of hours since the last sleep. So from the time you got up this morning to now, how many hours has that been? I'll give you a moment. You can use your fingers. I have done this many times. It helps. So X, the last 24 hours, Y, amount of sleep in the last 48 hours, and Z, the number of hours since you've been awake. So now step 2 of the calculator is actually calculating our score. So we're going to give ourselves some points. So the first part is for every hour that X is less than 5, we're going to add 4 points. And so I have an example down here. So if I slept 8 hours in the last 24, and then 8 minus 5 is 3, then I would go 3 times 4, which is 12 points. So for every hour that X is less than 5, sorry, I did a little. So if you slept 8, that's, my apologies. If you slept 8 hours, then 5 minus 8 is 0, and then is 0 points. But if you slept 3 hours, then 5 minus 3 is 2, which is 8 points. My apologies. I got this right on Tuesday. Sorry. So that for every hour that Y is less than 12, so this is where you calculate the number of hours you slept in the last 48 hours. So if you've slept only 10 hours in the last 12, you need to add 2 points for the difference. So 12 minus 10 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And then last, and I'll go over this again, so don't rush. We still have some time to add these numbers in. So for every hour that Z exceeds Y, we add a point. So Z was the number of hours since our last sleep, so the time from when we get up this morning. So now you're going to take Y and then subtract the 2 and then give yourself a point for each. So what I'm going to do is look at my sample that I have here, where I've already written in X, Y, and Z, where X was 6, Y was 13, and Z is 16. So for every hour that X is less than 5, I add 4 points. But I slept 6 hours, 5 minus 6 puts us in the negative, so that's 0 points. So for every hour that Y is less than 12, so when I slept in the last 48 hours, I have 13. So here, 12 minus 13 is also putting me in the negative, so it's 0. I'm doing good so far. So then the last one, for every hour that Z exceeds Y, so here, Z exceeds Y, add 1 point. So here I'm giving myself, with the difference of 3 points. So what you're going to do now, with the step 2 numbers that you've calculated just now, you're going to add X, Y, and Z together to get a total score. And we need this total score for our next poll. So I'm just going to give you a minute to just calculate that through. And then we're going to flip to poll 2. So Lori Forbes, can you launch poll 2 for me, please? So poll 2 is the result of where your number falls in each of the categories from the fatigue calculator. So my result was 3 from the fatigue calculator. So in the poll, I'm going to select the category between 1 to 4. So find your category and poke that in. And hopefully I'll have the same number of people responding as I did in the first poll, so our results are accurate.
So I've launched the poll and we see some voting coming in. And I know there was one person that was having a challenge voting. So if you have the same challenge this time, you can certainly put your number into the questions or the chat, and I will calculate that and send that to Lori after. But it shouldn't skew the numbers that terribly much. So we're at about 40% voted right now. So if you can get that in, that would be great. And a couple more seconds here to get that vote submitted.
Pick your category.
Okay, so I will launch the results. Oh, great, we have a good response. So,
excellent.
And your results. So 33% have 0, not tired. 33% are low levels of tiredness, and 33% have difficulty concentrating. The other 2 are 0%.
Excellent, thank you, Lori. Interesting, similar results that we had on Tuesday is that your perception was a little bit higher for your level of fatigueness versus your actual score. And we kind of chalk that up to being more so dealing with your work demands and the how you're feeling based on those work demands, making you feel a little bit more tired. So that is very telling and very good information. So here's your score interpretation. So if you take what you've calculated and you fill it into these more narrow categories, you kind of look at 0, you're saying, oh, no signs of fatigue at all. And so from our results, 33% of you have 0 fatigue, even though actually 0% of you said that you weren't feeling tired at all. Interesting. So 1 to 2, slower thinking may show signs of fatigue and mood changes. So here, you want to maintain mental alertness, maybe drink some coffee, take a break, go for a walk. So just to perk yourself up a bit, maybe having a nap in here at lunchtime would work. 3 to 4 may be having poor concentration while doing complex tasks. So maybe not perform those tasks at this point in time or start a long drive would be equivalent. Poor concentration for extended periods of time is between 5 and 6. And here we had on our actual results, 33% of you is sitting in this category. So poor concentration for extended periods, poor judgment, and lapse of attention. So you want to reduce your fatigue immediately. So in some situations, this could be getting some sleep or lessening those work demands. Then also in the 7 to 8 category, which puts you where we had 33% respond as well, we have poor attention, poor performance, and poor concentration on simple tasks. Again, reducing that fatigue, but not work alone, and then try not to make any major decisions during this point in time. Sometimes, as we mentioned, our judgment may be a little bit skewed based on that fatigue. So then 9 to 10. This was surprising. Some of you perceived yourself at a 9 to 10, and then we didn't get any of you on the fatigue calculator in this category. But even in this perception, serious lack of energy and motivation and no situational awareness, very serious here and very similar to 7 to 8, but you maybe consider not driving at all here and then getting some sleep. And then nobody perceives themselves to be nodding off. So in the 11 and up category, where you would have trouble staying awake, it means you have all of your attention at this point in time, so you don't have to stop this webinar and go get sleep. So we can continue on. So looking back a little bit at these results, did you get the result you expected? Are you surprised at your results? And now that we can compare to Tuesday's session, I am not surprised at today's result, but I was on Tuesday when we found it. But then when we consider some of the causes, especially with our recent pandemic situation, and then all the changes we need to make on farm to get things up and running, if you were kind of in the seasonal farming situation, such as the U-picks and vegetable farming at this point in time, there's a lot of demands and stress to implement some new changes to make sure we prevent the spread of COVID-19. So that could be creating a higher level of fatigue. So to kind of compare, I like looking at fatigue and alcohol. So this is kind of tells most people, I should say, has had a drink at some point in time, and they may have been under the influence to the point of impairment. So I like to compare the fatigue with the alcohol and its effects, so you kind of understand what fatigue may be doing as well. So if you look at it, with each hour that we stay awake, there's a drive to sleep for us to kind of want to go to sleep, and then our alertness fades. So if we're up at 6 a.m., we're probably doing our very best to the point of noon, but then at noon, we start to fade as those hours move on. So if you're up at 6 and then don't finish on the farm until 9 p.m., that can be quite a serious change. If you consider staying awake for just 17 to 19 hours straight impacts performance more than a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. Crazy, right? So, and then here, you're going to do this throughout the season. So 1.5 weeks spent sleeping just 6 hours a night can result in the same level of impairment on the 10th day as being awake for the previous 24 hours straight. And so if we slip down here, your blood alcohol level would be 0.1% if we were awake for this long. So in Nova Scotia, our impairment level, where we would have our license suspended, would be at 0.08. So we wouldn't even be able to drive. And then, of course, impairment slows our individual reaction time about 50% to compare to somebody who is very well rested. So here's a little bit of a quiz for you. So I'm going to go through a few questions, and you're not going to be able to poll and answer the questions in a public manner like we just did with the last poll, but I'm going to read the question. I'm going to let you think about it for a minute, and then I'm going to show you the answer. So if you like, you write your answers down on your paper and then follow along that way. The first question is, fatigue is always a sign of a serious medical condition. So if you remember one of our first slides on the causes of fatigue, what did we say? We said that it was false, because we know some of the other causes could be not enough sleep or our work demands. Women are more likely than men to experience fatigue. True or false? What do you think? It is true. Women have a tendency to multitask more than men do. They have a tendency to even think about and progress their day in their head and do several things at once than men. Men have a tendency to focus, and this is according to Harvard studies, and I have the references at the end, to just focus on that one particular task and work from one task to the next. Whereas women on farm, especially if it's a married couple on farm and they have kids, she's getting up in the morning and she's planning the whole entire day, just even at that first point of getting up. So then she's getting the kids either ready for school, or even in this past few months, homeschool, and then she still has tasks to do on the farm. Most couples now work off farm as well as on farm, so they could be getting ready for a job, doing work while the kids are doing their homeschool homework. Then, of course, there's groceries to be had. There's still farm tours to be done. There's still self-care for this person. Got to have a shower and sleep and eat and do all those things as well. And that day just progresses. And that's what's happening with women. And then men have a tendency to get up and say, okay, these are the 5 things I'm going to do. And they do each of one of those things independently, one after the other. So if you're complaining of general lack of energy, you are complaining of what? Fatigue, weakness, chronic fatigue syndrome, or all of the above? General lack of energy. And that is fatigue. Which of the following can cause acute fatigue? Alcohol, cigarettes, caffeine, or all of the above? And acute fatigue is short term, less than 3 months. You've been feeling this way with your lack of energy, just feeling a little bit drained, not able to charge your battery fully. Would these things cause that? And they do indeed. The next question is, which of the following medical conditions can cause chronic fatigue? So this is long-term, 6 months, a year or more that this person's experiencing this lack of energy and tiredness. So arthritis, cancer, hypothyroidism, or all of these, can they cause chronic fatigue? I'll give you a minute to think about that. And it is all of the above. Next question. Which of the following emotions, psychological conditions can cause chronic fatigue? Grief, depression, anxiety, or all of the above? And it's all of the above. I just want to make a comment as something that was brought up in a Tuesday session, which Taya brought up in relation to grief. And we could be, at this point in time, grieving as we have lost our whole entire norm of how we would normally operate on farm and in our general lives. So we have to distance from people. We could be grieving the touch of other people, that friends that we would meet or greet, or suppliers that come that we rely on and trust, and shake their hand and thank them for their services. And we've lost a lot of that. We've lost our schedules and those types of things. So grief could be weighing on you heavily at this point in time, and can show that in our responses in the poll. Exercise can help counter the effects of fatigue. True or false? This is true. You would think sleep would have a counter effect on fatigue, but it is exercise that helps, along with, of course, a regular sleep schedule, which we'll get into later. And lastly, which of the following has the most consistently positive effect on fatigue? Medication, acupuncture, moderate aerobic exercise, or strength training? And getting a hint from the last question, it is going to always go back to the moderate aerobic exercise. So let's look at what you're eating. Do you eat healthy? If you're busy on the farm, you're working that 17 to 19 hours a day, are you able to get good meals in? Are you eating your fruits and vegetables, proteins, whatever is a healthy diet for you? Or are you just grabbing whatever's easiest and closest? And I have a story for you. I have a friend who has many times complained of being very tired. She's a very busy person. She lives alone, so she doesn't prepare meals for anyone else. So if she gets home, she will have a tendency to just have gummy bears and root beer for dinner. And then she'll text or call, visit, and say, I don't know why I'm not feeling so good and I'm always tired. It does make a big difference on what you're eating. So perhaps eating what you produce and taking the time to actually prepare the fruits and vegetables, if you enjoy meat and any of the different proteins that are out there, dairy, incorporate that all into your diet and make sure that you're eating well throughout the workday. So let's look at the effects on mental health. Very interesting. So it says treating, and this is through the Harvard studies as well, treating a sleep disorder may alleviate symptoms of a mental health problem. So even fatigue is playing around with our chemistry in our brain and basically reacting differently depending on our level of fatigue. So studies suggest that a good night's sleep helps foster both mental and emotional resilience. Kind of think back of a time when you've been tired. Some of you between the 5 and 8 category right now. What is your mood? How do you feel? I know I have a friend who will just cry and cry and cry, and she'll just continue about her day, but that would be her reaction for most of the day. Sleep disruption wreaks havoc in the brain, impairing thinking and emotional regulation. Surprising that just a lack of sleep can do and react this way. If it's chronic sleep deprivation, it sets the stage for negative thinking and emotional vulnerability. So that means day in and day out, we just take whatever in our environment and focus on the negative. We have a tendency not to have the energy to bring in the positive or show the positive. So insomnia may amplify the effects of psychiatric disorders. And then those with mental health problems are more likely to have insomnia or other sleep disorders. So you can see if perhaps we improve our sleep or lessen our fatigue levels, because we know of the causes, our mental health state may improve and we can start working on a mental fitness plan. So to help with some of this, we may need some lifestyle changes. The Harvard University also says that it may be a good idea to give up caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. Now, I can hear some of you now, no, this can't be, we need these things, but perhaps then maybe give them up before bed or as you get closer to the time you want to go to sleep. It says here, nicotine is a stimulant, which actually speeds up the heart rate and thinking. So as you have your cigarette before you go to bed or vape, any of those types of products, some people are still wearing the nicotine patch, maybe taking that off before bed will help slow the thinking down, slow the heart rate down, and allow you to fall asleep. Interesting fact about alcohol, though, it does depress the nervous system, and it will help you fall asleep right away. But these effects actually wear off a couple hours into your sleep situation. And so people have a tendency to wake up and then you're laying there awake. So the closer you have alcohol towards your sleep time, the more apt it will help you get to sleep, but you won't stay asleep. So looking at physical activity, this is a key one. I know some of you might be thinking, oh, I work on the farm, I do lots of labor intensive work. The key to this is making sure the physical activity you do is actually raising your heart rate. And I show it right here. That is key. But also if you can do that aerobic activity to the point where you're allowed your brain to shut off. So when you're maybe walking the fields and moving bags of fertilizer, if that's within your weight capacities, walking on the farm at a quick pace, if you're getting that heart rate up, that is good. But if your heart rate is always staying at a norm, then this isn't the physical activity your body needs to help improve your sleep. So when you walk your fields, perhaps go down, you're checking your plants, your crops, then next row up, if you can, walk a little bit faster so that your breath increases. So you're taking more breaths per minute, and that helps build up the aerobic activity, and then will help you sleep at night as well. Sleep hygiene. I know we've we've been talking about personal hygiene and facility hygiene as it relates to COVID-19, but as it relates to FIG today, I'm talking about sleep hygiene. So this all deals with simple best practices for being able to have a good quality sleep. So first, of course, most of you know a good sleep-wake schedule is nice. Having a spot to sleep where it can be dark and free of any distractions is going to be good. One thing I find on farm, we have a tendency to need to put our office somewhere and have a spot to be able to do that work. Could be bookkeeping or even just planning. Some of us have actually moved it to the bedroom because it's a quiet space. But what happens generally is that we'll wake up maybe 2 in the morning with an idea and think, oh, okay, or thinking we forgot something. We'll go over to that side of the bedroom and start working. So that disrupts your sleep. So moving your office outside of the area where you sleep may be a good idea. Also, during the busy season, which we are hitting for most of you right now, you could end up with a sleep deficit because you're getting up so early and going to bed so late. But you can try to make up for this deficit, actually. So you can, if you get a chance, maybe you have Monday, you know it's going to rain, you don't have as much to do, sleep a couple extra hours. You can try taking a nap after lunch. My brother-in-law is a farmer, and he's been farming for many, many years. And for as long as I can remember, he has always had his lunch, and he just gets a 30-minute lunch. He'll eat his lunch within like 10 minutes-ish, and then he'll take a nap. So he finds a spot on the farm that's comfortable for him, and he will have his nap, and 15 minutes will do him, and he can go for several more hours, and he's completely refreshed. So if that's something that you're able to do, that might be a benefit for you as well. Some relaxation techniques. I have meditation here, and some of you may not quite like the idea of meditation, but what that means is it's basically allowing your brain to shut off. So meditation is like clearing your mind and just basically allowing what happened during the day go. So I tie my exercise and my relaxation / meditation together. I like to swim either in the morning or the evening. And here, as I am doing the swimming strokes, I allow my brain to just kind of sort through everything that happened during the day or what I want to happen throughout the day and just let everything go. So I also call this my think tank because I find once this happens, you can come up with some pretty good ideas. So it is important to make sure you have at some point in your day the ability to just let things go, so relax. And to do this, maybe exercise isn't the mode for you, depending on what you're doing, because if you're running on the road, I suggest you not turn your mind off, but perhaps maybe use some breathing exercises instead. And there is an app for that. And the app that I refer to, and I even have on my phone, is called Calm in the Storm. Great app that gives you just different hints and tips of breathing exercises, but also gives you like a little icon or window that allows you to breathe with it. So it gives you a method of just releasing any of those stresses that you have. On the iPhone as well, there's an app called Breathe, and it can actually set reminders for you to breathe throughout the day. And I set this on the days that if I'm having a lot of stress, I'm very busy, there's a lot going on, I will actually set that. So I will take, and it only takes a minute, set it so that it will remind me, take that moment, and it will actually time the moment for me, and then give me a little buzz to say it's done, and then I move on. So that might be something that helps you as well. Lots of different tools out there. Cognitive behavioral therapy is key as well. This ties in with your positive attitude. And we talked about while we're fatigued, things always being negative because we don't have the energy to turn everything to the positive. So it is important, though, to change negative expectations and try to build more confidence to have a good night's sleep. So staying positive helps build with that. So anytime you have a negative thought, turn it into a positive and start that practice at first, and then soon everything will be staying in the positive. Doesn't mean you have to be overly happy. It just changes the way your thought patterns run. So to help with that, kind of looking at changing the blame game. So attributing everything to not getting enough sleep the night before. So good on-farm example. So if you're going out to milk the cows, but they're not coming into the barn as they should, instead of saying, oh, they never come in, what the heck? Instead, you can say, oh, Bessie's looking around today, just looking at the trees, staring at the birds. And that kind of mindset changes how you move forward throughout the day. So here, Mind the Gap Farm. So how do we run a fatigue at risk management program? First, we have to think about reducing the fatigue. So we can do that by recognizing the signs and symptoms. And some of those signs and symptoms can be quite obvious. So as I mentioned, if you're at an 11, which was nodding off, your head would be bobbing and weaving as we go through this webinar, or even as you're driving the tractor down the rows, nodding off and just bobbing. Very dangerous. You could be doing this on the street, especially if you've been awake upwards of 17 to 19 hours. Constant yawning is a key indicator as well. Rubbing your eyes is definitely one. This is allergy season, that could be another, but looking at fatigue, rubbing your eyes is key. We talked about not being able to concentrate. Difficulty remembering things. So if we look at the average age of the farmer here in Nova Scotia, it's about 57. So a lot of people attribute that to age, but if we also look at farmers in Nova Scotia and the hours that we typically keep, we can certainly attribute that memory loss to fatigue. One of the big ones, and that relates to incidents and incident reporting, is not able to anticipate hazards. So if you lose that ability to anticipate hazards as a basic cause of and sign of fatigue, that's an increase in injury and incident rates that can happen on your farm. So key to make sure we reduce those. And then of course, you guys know, just a pure lack of energy. So know the effects of your fatigue impairment. What we've gone through today, this may help you figure out what affects you and then how it affects the different aspects of your life on the farm and how you work and how even you deal with people socially. So it's interesting once you start to focus on this. Find your system to mitigate the risk. So what are you going to do to be able to reduce fatigue and improve conditions? I also have here an incident reporting process. So if you do have an incident on the farm, have an incident report. This is just the directions, and this is available on our website, which I reference on the next slide and in references at the end. This is an incident report form that actually highlights components of fatigue that could have caused or is an underlying cause of the particular incident. So we look at the level of alertness here. We see if they were fatigued before starting work, and we even calculate the hours of when they last slept. And then, of course, scrolling down a little bit further, were you fatigued before starting work again? Underneath the follow-up, how long you were awake before? What were you doing when you first felt tired? Any actions you took to fight the fatigue? So did you drink coffee? Did you take a nap? Anything like that? But also focusing here, were you experiencing stress? And that could be a big part of that when we looked at one of the causes being work demands. And then, of course, you can use your fatigue calculator to see, is it my work demands that are causing the fatigue, or is it that I'm not getting enough sleep? And then, of course, you can develop your own fatigue at risk management policy. This is where you would outline your commitment to mitigate the hazard, but also how you're going to mitigate that hazard. And as mentioned, here's reference to the farm safety website that goes to the fatigue at risk management program that I have outlined based on the information and resources that I've put together. So with that, do you have any questions? Taya.
Well, that's fantastic, Lori. I appreciate that presentation, and I'd like to ask our audience. I do have some questions here, but if you have any questions for Lori about fatigue awareness and management, you can feel free to type them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. So Lori, thank you for your presentation. I have a question here for you about cannabis, and I know that you are not a healthcare professional, but you've done a lot of research in this area on fatigue. Do you have any idea about if cannabis consumption affects sleep? Does it help or hinder, or how might that impact fatigue levels?
There's a lot of research out there, and it's gone either way. Some sources say it does, and some sources say it doesn't. And what I have noticed, though, each of those sources has something in common, and it is that cannabis affects everybody differently. So I think individually, you're going to have to kind of play it out and see if it does affect you. And so eliminate it maybe for 2 to 3 weeks and see if your sleep improves, or perhaps use it and then see if your sleep improves or it gets worse. So it's going to be that kind of system, because I think the research is still ongoing because legal cannabis is so new. So the research is just starting now, really.
For sure. It also depends on what strains of cannabis people are using. So some seem more inclined to put you to sleep, and some seem more inclined to rev you up. So I think we have to take that into consideration too, both the people and the type of cannabis that's being consumed and how it's being consumed. So I think all of those factors would definitely, and like you said, this is fairly new. There's lots of research on illegal use, but our new legal use is changing how people probably want to describe their cannabis use and the effects of it. So I hope that we'll learn more about that and then can take that into consideration for safety of everyone. Thanks for that answer. I have a question here about having access to the resources shared in the presentation. And what I will say about that before turning it over to Lori Forbes and or Lori Brookhouse is, after today's webinar, all participants will get an email with a link so that they can watch the recorded webinar. And at that point in time, they can go in and click on any of those links that Lori has mentioned today. So that's how you can access that. Lori Forbes or Lori Brookhouse, any other comments about that question about accessing the resources shared?
No, I just brought up the slide for the references as well, so you can access those. But when you get the copy of the presentation, they'll be there too.
Great, thanks so much. I've got another question for you. The question is, thank you for speaking about what we eat and how that impacts our fatigue level. Are you able to talk about the amount of water that we consume and how water could contribute to fatigue in any way?
What is interesting, I have a tendency to drink a lot of water during the day, and so I too thought that may have an impact. And in any of the research that I've done, water actually wasn't brought up or mentioned as being a part of cause for fatigue. Mostly nutrition, not necessarily water. And then of course they focused on alcohol and caffeine, so different types of beverages that could alter your levels of tiredness, but nothing noted for water.
Okay. I imagine that it's fairly important to keep us going. As a former educator myself, I always talked about water being the lubrication for the brain. It's almost like the oil in any vehicle. You know, food would be the gasoline. It's what actually fuels it, but you need that water there to kind of lubricate everything and make a lot of the actual firings actually happen. So I imagine it's important, and that's funny that your research didn't point that out in any way specifically at this point in time. Thanks for that answer. But yeah, that's funny to hear.
Yeah,
That water wasn't a huge part. I thought it would have been the fuel that drives everything. But yeah, definitely food, sleep, mental health are so important. Thanks,
Tay, that
Lori.
was my
I've got an
anticipation as well for somebody who drinks a lot of water. Like that's my drink of choice. I don't drink pop or any of the other beverages. I do have coffee, but throughout the day, water is my thing. And so I actually anticipated that being in the research and was quite surprised when it wasn't.
So interesting what research comes up with.
Right?
Okay, I've got a question for you. I'm going to read this question out because it's a little bit longer. And it says, in an industry where being strong and carrying on is the mantra, how do we increase buy-in to having producers monitor and log the impact of fatigue and work-related stress testing and then implement changes?
I'm gonna skip back to a few slides here because that is key. So I'm gonna go right up to mind the gap, farm, farm, farm. So this is not easy. It's it's basically taking a whole entire culture. Here, I'm just gonna skip out of there. Right here. Oh, it didn't go. Hang on. My apologies. Just a few slides in here. There. So you look at this and you can see the three major components and fatigue being one of them. And we really, as you can see, it's a huge hazard that we need to get buy-in. But when we change the culture on the farm and how things are communicated, that's how we get a little bit more buy-in. But also, if you have a plan, so if you have a best practice, and as I mentioned, a fatigue at risk management policy and have a program in place, you start adding those things to your incident report. So just drop it in little bits at a time and then communicate that in a positive way. You have a tendency to get a little bit better buy-in, especially if you can show them the effects it can possibly have and the costs to the organization, the farm, if incidents are happening in relation to fatigue. Let me know if you need me to elaborate on that question if I didn't answer it completely.
Thanks, Lori. I think it goes back to some of the research that I uncovered when I was doing some research on the barriers to implementing farm safety. And one of the largest barrier was the tendency for farmers to put production above personal safety. So even though you're really tired, you're going to take one more lap of the field on your combine just to get it done, or you're going to do one more lap with the baler because it looks like rain is coming, or you're going to do one more. And that tendency to drive ourselves, even when we are feeling very fatigued, to get that work done is very much an attitude within the agricultural industry, I find. I know I grew up with that attitude, and it takes a lot to change that and to start to realize that my one more lap might make it so that I can't enjoy this tomorrow, and just that mindset of changing in those ways. But it's not easy to change as an industry, that's for sure. And it takes some strong leaders to model that for us to start to change it. So if you're a leader, I would encourage you to start modeling, putting personal safety as a priority. You know, we do have weather, we've got demands, we've got all sorts of things coming, but if we're not around tomorrow to farm a bit more, it really doesn't seem worth it sometimes. I'm going to go on and ask a couple more questions. Lori, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Perfect. I've got a question for you. Do you think that COVID-19 has created a space where this fatigue or work stress or stress on well-being has become a priority? We're thinking more about awareness of our fatigue, more awareness of our well-being, more awareness of the amount of stress in our life.
I think it has. It's kind of let us sit back and evaluate every aspect on the farm. So, as we want to prevent the spread of COVID-19, I think we've looked at everything in our life, and we've discovered too to not contract it ourselves. We need to be our best healthy selves, and part of that is making sure we get enough sleep, eat well, and get enough exercise. So I think it has allowed us to reset a little bit and evaluate and basically regroup, if you will. So in a way, I think this virus has kind of allowed us to slow down a little bit and look at all these different components of our lifestyle and figure out what we're going to do next. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And the second part of this question, thank you for answering. The first part was more a statement, recognizing that there is a degree of grief built into the ag industry that isn't necessarily found in all other industries. And the ag industry, we know across Canada, it is a unique industry. It's a very, very important industry, but it is unique in different ways. And some of the pressures that farmers have felt, and in some cases, the lack of support they felt through the pandemic has been very challenging. And I know some producers, it's been fairly business as usual through the pandemic, especially for a lot of grain farmers that are out in the field
Mhm.
doing what they usually do this time of year. But for a lot of our livestock producers, things look very different, and there's some big challenges ahead and some new considerations, a whole new playing field for them. So I think there's definitely some grief going on and
Yeah,
some pivoting going on in the ag industry right now.
absolutely.
Yeah. Those are all the questions we have. I'll just leave it open for any other minute if anyone else has anything. But I think we're coming to the end of our webinar for today. I just wanted to thank both Lori Brookhouse for her really strong presentation and for sharing with us information about fatigue awareness and management. And I really appreciate Lori Forbes being online to organize this and help us with these webinars, the logistics of them. That's hugely helpful. Thank you to Manitoba Agriculture for that. And I just want to say thank you to our audience today, both for your attention and for your great questions coming in. This was really wonderful, and I'm getting in the question box lots of thank yous coming in from our audience. So thanks so much for that. Please expect an email with a survey so that you could tell us if today met your expectations and how we can get better in the future. We'd love it if you'd spend 2 minutes and fill that out. It's very, very short. With that, I will say thanks to everyone and end our presentation for today. And yeah, thanks, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Taya.
You're welcome.